Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's stay-at-home lecture. I'm Tim Nutt, Director of the Historical Research Center at UAMS. And the UAMS Historical Research Center is the archives division of the university. We're located within the University of Arkansas University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences Library, excuse me. And we are the only archives in the state that is dedicated to collecting and preserving the history of medical and other health sciences in Arkansas. And we have all sorts of types of materials in our collections. Of course, we have the books on the history of medicine, not just Arkansas, but a broad range of books dealing with the various aspects on the history of medicine. We also have a lot of many artifacts. All of those are related to the health professions in Arkansas. So we have doctors' bags for physicians. We have medical instruments. We have medical instruments from the Civil War. We have a baby kit from the Arkansas Department of Health from the 1940s. And then, of course, the archival material with the photographs, journals, and the institutional records of UAMS. So if you're on campus and you'd like to come by and visit us, I'd love to have you come by, and I'd love to give you a tour of our facility and show you some of the interesting materials that we have in our collection. We are located in Education Building 2 on campus, just inside the UAMS library. Tonight is the September edition of Stay at Home Lecture, and Stay at Home Lecture is sponsored by the Society for the History of Medicine and Health Professions, which is the Friends organization for the Historical Research Center. And the Society provides a lot of support for the Historical Research Center, not only in the form of programming like this. They also sponsor an annual dinner and lecture where we sort of get together and we have some a time to visit and hear about some of the accomplishments of the Historical Research Center from the past year. Unfortunately, because of COVID, the annual dinner has been canceled for the last couple of years. We're hoping this year or perhaps in the spring to be able to bring the dinner back and have the lecture. And we're also hoping to have different other programming throughout the year, the rest of this year and throughout next year. So hopefully we'll get a little bit back to normal as far as our programming. If you're not a member of the society, I'd encourage you to join, or at least consider joining. On the screen is the URL that goes to the society's homepage on the library website, but you can also skip that and just go to paypal.me/shmhp if you'd like to just skip all the formalities and just go and join. The dues are relatively inexpensive. For an individual, it's $15. For a student, whether you're a student at UAMS, any other university or college, or even high school in Arkansas or around the United States, you're more than welcome to join the society, and we'd love to have you. Also on your screen, you'll see the contact information for the Historical Research Center. If you have any questions after tonight's presentation, or if you have any ideas for future topics for presentations, please let me know. Send me an email to hrc@uams.edu, and my phone number is on the screen as well. I'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts about presentations, future presentations. Next month in October, I hope you'll join us then. Our presenter will be Dr. Sam Taggart, who's a retired family practice physician. He practiced in Benton, and he is a member of the Society's Board of Trustees. And he will be giving a presentation on entitled "For Every Family, a Family Doctor: History of the Modern Family Medicine in Arkansas," which is a continuation of a series that he's been doing over the last year or so about rural family physicians around Arkansas. And so he's always a great speaker. So I encourage you to come back next month on the 6th to hear Dr. Taggart. The link that you use to join tonight's meeting will be the same link that you'll join next month's meeting. And that link will stay the same no matter which month or which presentation it is. Tonight, I am very pleased to welcome back as a presenter, Rachel Silva Patton. And she is the executive director of Preserve Arkansas, which is the premier historical preservation society in Arkansas. She formerly worked at the Department of Arkansas Heritage and their Arkansas AHPP, Arkansas Historical Preservation Program. Sorry, Rachel, I messed that up. And currently she is the president of the Arkansas Historical Association. I'm very pleased to have her. She's a great friend, great presenter. So Rachel, I am going to stop sharing my screen. And if you'll share your screen before I turn off my video.
Okay. There we go. Does it look all right?
It looks great and we hear you perfectly. So I'm going to turn off my video and audio and it's all yours.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Tim, and good evening to all of you. The Arkansas Tuberculosis Sanatorium Historic District is one of the largest historic districts in Arkansas, encompassing nearly 900 acres on Potts Ridge, known locally as The Hill. The district was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 2006 with national significance for its role in the fight against tuberculosis during much of the 20th century and also for its collection of early 20th century architecture. This map shows you, if you're not familiar with this part of the state of Arkansas, the sanatorium is located at Booneville, Arkansas, which is about 40 miles southeast of Fort Smith and 130 miles northwest of Little Rock. This map from the Encyclopedia of Arkansas is a little more detailed, and you can see there's Booneville and the purple star that I put on the map and I wrote sanatorium. That's where it is in relation to the city of Booneville. It's south of town a little bit. It's 4 miles south of downtown Booneville, to be exact. And if you're heading south from downtown on Highway 23, you cross over the Petit Jean River Bridge and there's a sharp turn in the road and Highway 116 kind of veers off of that sharp corner, and that's how you get to the sanatorium. This is an aerial view postcard of the sanatorium campus from the early 1940s. The Arkansas Sanatorium was the largest and the best facility of its kind in the entire country by 1940, and it served as a model for tuberculosis treatment facilities in other states and also abroad. The Arkansas Sanatorium was completely self-sufficient, including patient treatment buildings for adults and for children, housing for employees and their families, a dairy, a water treatment plant, fire station, laundry, ice plant, bakery. It had its own post office and a movie theater. Gardens and orchards were planted all around the sanatorium, and they even owned 1,000 acres of additional land off Highway 10 in Booneville for more livestock. This is an aerial photo taken in 2016 of the sanatorium campus. The facility was in operation from 1910 until 1973, and the Booneville Human Development Center has occupied the campus since the sanatorium closed in 73. BHDC is a residential treatment facility for adults with developmental disabilities. BHDC currently serves about 120 clients and employs 285 staff. It's one of 5 state-managed training facilities for adults with developmental disabilities. The other facilities in Arkansas are at Arkadelphia, Conway, Jonesboro, and Warren. Tuberculosis is a disease characterized by a persistent cough that is worse in the morning, sometimes producing blood, chest pain, lack of breath, fever and night sweats, severe fatigue, weight loss, and symptoms of pneumonia. Tuberculosis is a contagious disease spread through the air via sputum, like the common cold, the flu, and COVID-19. When infected people cough, sneeze, talk, or spit, they propel tubercle bacillus into the air, which can then enter the lungs of another individual. The disease has had many names over the years, including consumption, wasting disease, graveyard cough, King's evil, which was a type of lymph node tuberculosis that was thought to be healed by the king's touch, and the white plague. Early treatments for tuberculosis were painful and sometimes harmful to patients, but that was all part of the evolution of modern medicine. Doctors were desperately trying to find a cure for this terrible disease, and any therapy that might provide positive results was quickly touted as a cure-all. Beginning in the early 1800s, doctors prescribed a bleeding regimen, a near starvation diet, bed rest, and of course, medical migrations where the afflicted would seek an area with plenty of sun and nice weather. In the United States, this meant heading to the mountains or heading west. Altitude therapy was also used briefly, where the patient would be taken up in a hot air balloon to breathe the atmosphere free of germs. And a company in Austria even sold bottled air at very high prices. That bottle was to be opened in your room and put by your bedside table at night. Codfish oil was often prescribed to patients because it contained vitamins A and D. Inhalation therapy, where patients would inhale gases like oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and nitrous oxide, was also used. And in advanced cases of tuberculosis, doctors often permitted the use of laudanum as a painkiller and a sedative. In 1882, German physician Dr. Robert Koch isolated the tubercle bacillus and asserted that tuberculosis was caused by this specific germ. This was a major scientific breakthrough, as most experts up until this time believed that TB was hereditary. Lung collapse therapy, also known as the artificial pneumothorax, became the mainstay of tuberculosis treatment in the 1920s, allowing the lung to be at rest and to heal itself. Oxygen was injected into the lung cavity in order to collapse the lung. And some doctors even inserted small spheres or sponges into that space between the chest wall and the outer layer of the lung to keep the lung collapsed, which sometimes caused further infection. Along the same lines, removal of the phrenic nerve, which runs from your spinal cord to your diaphragm, was also a popular practice. The idea was to paralyze the diaphragm, which contracts and allows your lungs to expand, again, so that the lungs would be further immobilized and be at rest. The pulmonary resection, which was the removal of the diseased portion of the lung, was first performed at the Arkansas Sanatorium in October 1954. But the age of heroic surgery was epitomized in the thoracoplasty. This was a major surgery and one of the riskiest operations. A thoracoplasty is the removal of part of the chest wall, including the ribs and muscles, allowing that part of the chest to sink in and collapse the underlying lung. Some doctors recommended this surgery up until the early 1960s. Chemotherapy treatment and antibiotics were developed in the mid-20th century to fight TB. The antibiotics isoniazid and rifampicin are used today to treat tuberculosis, and chemotherapy is also used to treat drug-resistant cases. Although tuberculosis is treatable and curable, the disease is still the 13th deadliest cause, is is still the 13th leading cause of death worldwide. According to the World Health Organization, in 2020, 10 million people became infected with tuberculosis, and out of those, 1.5 million died from the disease. TB largely affects adults in their most productive years who have compromised immune systems due to a variety of factors, including HIV, malnutrition, diabetes, or tobacco use. The largest number of new cases occurred in Southeast Asia, the Western Pacific, and in Africa. But tuberculosis is in every part of the world, including Arkansas. According to the Arkansas Department of Health, in 2020, Arkansas had 59 reported cases of tuberculosis. That number was down from 79 in 2018. So the 2020 rate comes out to about 2 cases per 100,000 people in Arkansas, which is now a very good and low rate. Treatments used here at the Arkansas Sanatorium included bed rest, fresh air, a controlled diet, lung collapse therapy, the phrenic nerve operation, the pulmonary resection, thoracoplasty, chemotherapy, and antibiotics. This was a state-of-the-art facility. The sanatorium concept really took off in the second half of the 19th century, based on the idea of isolation of the infected from other potential victims. The first sanatorium in the US was built outside of Saranac Lake, New York in 1884 by New York physician Edward Livingston Trudeau. Prior to 1900, most sanatoria were private facilities which charged quite a bit of money, so most people were treated at home. However, around the turn of the 20th century, there was a shift toward the creation of publicly run facilities. Arkansas was one of the first southern states to build a sanatorium. The Arkansas Tuberculosis Association was formed in 1908 and immediately pushed for a bill to create a state tuberculosis sanatorium here in Arkansas. The bill was prepared by State Senator Kai Oldham of Pulaski County, who suffered from tuberculosis. Oldham had met fellow TB patients Judge Joseph M. Hill, who's pictured here, who was from Fort Smith and had served as the Chief Justice of the Arkansas Supreme Court before his illness forced him to retire, and Dr. C.P. Merriweather, who was from Little Rock, while he was in Arizona taking the cure for tuberculosis. These 3 men were instrumental in getting the bill passed. Act 378 was approved by Governor George Donaghy in May 1909, and $50,000 was appropriated for the establishment of a state sanatorium, with $30,000 for 2 years of maintenance. However, there was a lack of funds, so they had to wait until the next fiscal year to begin work on the facility. In the meantime, and these are photos from the 1920 scrapbook at the sanatorium that are on the screen. In the meantime, the state had to find a suitable location for the sanatorium. The facility needed about 1,000 acres, and the city of Booneville offered to donate 973 acres of land for the sanatorium, which the state accepted. The site was perfect because of its mountainous terrain away from the city, where the air would be fresher, supposedly bringing relief from the disease. The first buildings constructed at the sanatorium were of wood frame construction, like these pictured, and included an administration building, a ward building, male and female cottages, and several tent houses with low walls and large flaps that were hinged at the top, so they could be propped open to allow air to flow through the buildings. The only surviving building from this period is a portion of the original administration building, which was incorporated into the current Commons building between 1938 and 1940. So it's not recognizable or visible, but it's in there somewhere inside a larger building. Dr. John Shibley was the first head of the state sanatorium, and the first patient was admitted on August the 2nd, 1910. It was not long before patients were being turned away because there was not enough room to house them in the 88-bed facility. In order to accommodate the increasing number of patients from around the state, additional buildings were needed. In 1913, the legislature appropriated $15,000 for a 24-bed hospital for the, quote, far advanced cases. It was named Chi Oldham Hall after the senator who had worked so hard to establish the sanatorium, and he died from tuberculosis in 1911. Oldham Hall burned in 1926, but it was rebuilt and served as the sanatorium's principal hospital-type building until 1930. Construction on the sanatorium grounds continued between 1915 and 1927, including the 24-bed Eccles Hall, a $21,000 water plant, and a $12,000 dairy. The dairy had 21 cows that provided milk for the 114 patients living at the sanatorium. The Masonic Building for Children was dedicated in 1924, and the Kelly Building, which was originally known as the Occupational Therapy Building, was built in 1927. However, the construction of new buildings couldn't keep up with the demand. The facility was accepting an average of 400 patients each year. Patient life in the sanatorium was strictly controlled. Former patients have remarked that, quote, every day was like a Tuesday, meaning that every day consisted of the same routine and nothing exciting or different ever happened. By 1925, patients at the sanatorium spent most of their day resting or reclining outside, and they ate a diet of milk and eggs to combat the severe weight loss. And just as a point of interest, something that I found in one of the Sanatorium Outlook publications, the newest fad treatment at the sanatorium in 1928 was a sauerkraut diet where patients ate nothing but kraut juice and water, which of course acted as a laxative and was supposed to allow the organs to rest and recuperate. This is worthy of mentioning here. The Arkansas Tuberculosis Sanatorium at Booneville was for whites only. Governor Thomas McRae authorized a sanatorium for African Americans in 1923, but funds were not appropriated for it until 1929, when Governor Harvey Parnell set aside $54,000 for the construction of a facility at Alexander, southwest of Little Rock. At the time, the TB survival rate for African Americans was only 25%. The sanatorium was named in honor of Governor McRae, and in 1930, the Thomas C. McRae Sanatorium opened its doors. McRae was the first institution of its type in the country staffed entirely by African Americans. The McRae Sanatorium operated until 1968, when the Booneville facility was integrated, and then it housed the Alexander Human Development Center, which was closed in June of 2011. And some of this complex remains, but the main hospital building at Alexander was severely damaged by fire in March 2020. And I honestly don't know what the status is, if it's still standing or if it's been demolished since that devastating fire a couple of years ago. The Arkansas Sanatorium became so overcrowded during the 1930s that the WPA began constructing portable cottages for counties around the state to house and care for their own tuberculosis patients. A solution to the overcrowding problem came in 1935. The Wildcat Mountain Sub-Hospital was located about 5 miles east of downtown Fort Smith and had been built by the government as a county camp for transients. The government had abandoned it, and since the sanatorium needed more space, the WPA renovated and converted the buildings for use as an overflow facility. It was completed by 1937 and greatly helped fight tuberculosis in Arkansas by providing more beds for patients. It was used until 1958, when the sanatorium board determined that it was no longer economical to operate. In this area, I don't see any evidence of any of these buildings still standing today at all. It's now part of Carol Ann Cross Park in Fort Smith. This is the entrance gate to the sanatorium. The most significant building boom at the sanatorium occurred between 1938 and 1940. Senators Lee Nichols of Booneville and Leo Nyberg of Helena, who was himself suffering from tuberculosis and also a patient at the sanatorium, fought for the passage of the Nichols-Nyberg Act, which would provide $1.2 million for an extensive building program at the sanatorium. The Public Works Administration gave the sanatorium a grant for almost $950,000 to supplement the construction. And the total of those two amounts today would be worth about $42 million. This building campaign increased the number of patient beds from 640 to 1,200. It was also the largest PWA project in the state of Arkansas, both in monetary value and in the number of buildings constructed. They built 32 buildings at that time. These are some of the cottages that were constructed as part of that PWA building campaign. They were built between 1938 and 40 to house sanatorium staff. And interestingly, many former patients who recovered from tuberculosis got jobs as nurses and support staff and continued to live in cottages like these and stayed on the hill. Now some of these houses serve as housing for employees of the Human Development Center. They're simple wood frame craftsman style houses with fieldstone foundations. The administration building was built in 1940 with $35,000 in PWA funds. It originally housed the bank and all of the administrative offices, including the superintendent's office. BHDC currently uses it for their human resources department. The building is designed in the Art Deco style with a fieldstone foundation, buff brick walls, and a flat roof with concrete coping. Geometric designs are featured in the coping, in the decorative medallions on the front facade, and the decorative grille on the transom window above the front door. This is one of several original nurses' home buildings. I believe it's the only one that's left out of all the nurses' home buildings. The others have been demolished. The nurses' home was also part of that big PWA building project between 1938 and 1940. It had a capacity of 120 people. It was designed in the colonial revival style with a fieldstone foundation and buff brick walls. And the building has a symmetrical layout, dormer windows, and elaborate door surrounds with pediments supported by pilasters. The building is now used by BHDC as a men's dormitory. And this is the Nyberg building. It was named after State Senator Leo E. Nyberg of Helena, who fought for the passage of that legislation, the Nichols-Nyberg Act in 1938, to provide money for the sanatorium for their large building campaign. And he died of tuberculosis on March 7th, 1940, just 4 months before the dedication ceremony for this building. This is what it looks like today from the other side. The Nyberg building was designed in the Art Deco style by the architectural firms of Harrelson and Mott of Fort Smith and Erhardt and Eichenbaum of Little Rock, who also designed the other buildings constructed between 38 and 40. You'll see they all look sort of similar in style and have the buff brick. The Nyberg building features a fieldstone foundation and again, buff brick exterior. And I'll show you a close-up of the front entrance. The building has a decorative cast stone door surround with geometric and floral patterns on it. And really up high at the top of that central block are some mythological designs at the top of those pilasters. One side shows a man or a warrior stabbing a dragon, and that can be interpreted as him fending off tuberculosis. And the building also boasts some excellent cast iron grille work above the front entrance and to the sides of the front doors. Ground was broken for the building on October the 17th, 1938, and it was completed by February 1940. It cost $725,000 to build the Nyberg building. The building is exactly 528 feet or 1/10 of a mile long and 50 feet wide. The building's 6-story central block is flanked by 2 5-story wings. It has a floor area of more than 140,000 square feet, and it contained 523 patient beds. That's the same buildings from as close to that same angle as I could get, with the administration building in the foreground and the Nyberg building right behind it. These photos show a patient room on the left, and then looking down one of the hallways in Nyberg on the right. The patient rooms are small, and they're set up as suites with a restroom in between 2 patient rooms. And this building housed the sanatorium's morgue on the first floor, and there was also a cafeteria on another end of the first floor. But I did some counting. There were 38 rooms on each side of the hallway going down the length of the Nyberg building. But some floors were not for patient rooms. They had other things in them. And so doing the math, there for sure had to be at least 2 patients in each room. That was a question another time I gave this presentation, is how many patients were in each room. At least 2. X-ray and lab departments were located at the Nyberg building as well. And state prisoners with tuberculosis were also sent to the sanatorium at Booneville. They were kept in cells on the top floor of the Nyberg building. Right now, only half of the building's 2nd floor is in use by the Human Development Center, and they use that portion for their administrative offices and some physicians' offices as well. The Nyberg building is supposedly very haunted. If you Google it or go on YouTube and look up Haunted Sanatorium, Arkansas, you'll probably find some videos of the ghost hunters at Nyberg. Several paranormal groups, I think, investigate that building pretty regularly. This is another patient room on the left up on the top floor. And then on the right, that's also on the top floor, I believe. That's one of the old laboratory rooms. And this is at the museum, which is located in one of the cottages. It's been open since 2010 on the 100th anniversary of the sanatorium. And so they've set up a portion of the museum to look like that actually has the stuff in it from a typical patient room at the sanatorium. So I'm going to read this to you because it's hard to see on the photo that I took of the plaque. The plaque on the left is in the lobby in the foyer of the Nyberg building, and that's a picture of Leo Nyberg on the right. The plaque says, "This building named in memory of Leo E. Nyberg, 1905 to 1940, who, while a patient at this sanatorium, conceived the building program of which this building is a part. As a member of the legislature of the state of Arkansas, he devoted his remaining energies to the accomplishment of this building program in the face of determined opposition and at the cost of then being unable to regain his own health. Not mere brick and stone will be his monument, but untold lives his devotion will save." This is the plant management building, or the power plant at the sanatorium. It was completed in October 1939. It had a furnace with a smokestack and 3 very large boilers on its lower level, which powered a steam heat system for the entire sanatorium campus. Tunnels for the steam ducts were dug by hand, and they still run underground, connecting many of the buildings at the sanatorium campus. At one time, this building also housed the laundry and the ice plant. According to Jim Biggs, who lived at the sanatorium from 1942 to 1956, while his mother ran their cafeteria, there were large vats in the floor of this building to form 200-pound ice blocks, which were stored in a walk-in freezer and loaded onto trucks from the rear loading dock. These big blocks were cut up to make 20 to 50-pound blocks of ice for each cottage, and each cottage had an ice box on the back porch. In addition, 2 quarts of milk and 1 quart of cream were delivered every other day. He said you would put your laundry out on the front porch in a basket, and they'd pick it up once a week and take it here to wash it at the laundry. And this building is currently in use by the Human Development Center as their maintenance building. And it also has all of the original drawings and blueprints for every building on campus are in this building. Tuberculosis did not spare children, and the sanatorium needed a place to house its young patients. In 1922, Judge Hill suggested that the Bell Point Masonic Lodge of Fort Smith erect a building for the care of children at the sanatorium. The Masonic Order constructed a 24-bed building at the cost of $57,000, and it was dedicated in 1924. The building served as a residential facility and as a grammar school for the children. And this postcard is looking at it from the opposite direction. The Masonic building was later enlarged and expanded with state funding. And this is the second Masonic building. On the 100th anniversary of the Bell Point Lodge in 1948, they again gave money to the sanatorium for the construction of a school and a recreation building. This is the one pictured here, and it's now a freestanding building, but it was once connected to the others to form an L shape. This is that building today. You can see the water towers are still there behind it. According to Richard Myers, who was a patient at the sanatorium as a child in the late 40s and early 50s, the Masonic building housed infants up to children in 8th grade. Boys and girls were not allowed to interact at all, or at least they weren't supposed to. The 1st through 4th grade students went to school in the morning, and 5th through 8th grade went in the afternoon. School mostly consisted of reading or being read to, and resembled a babysitting service more than an actual classroom. The ornamentation on the Masonic building is minimal, except for the cast stone door surround featuring the Masonic square and compass and the words "Wisdom is strength." Now the Masonic building is used by the Human Development Center clients to weave and loom their rugs and placemats. The BHDC clients engage in several pre-vocational projects, including the rug making they do here and recycling. The rugs are sold at Booneville Human Development Center and at area craft fairs, and all of the money goes into the client account for them to buy personal items. The fire station was completed in 1959, providing yet another level of self-sufficiency. And the station still operates as a volunteer fire department today. Even though the sanatorium technically did not have a fire station until 1959, they had a fire truck. The original 1942 LaFrance fire truck is parked in front of what is now the Sanatorium Museum. This is the Judge Joseph M. Hill building. is named after Judge Hill, who had worked to get the legislature to create the state sanatorium in 1909, and who had been the chairman of the Arkansas Tuberculosis Sanatorium Commission from its creation in 1909 until his death in 1950, with the exception of 4 years where he served in World War II. The advent of antibiotics made sanatoria obsolete. Beginning in the early 1950s, doctors began sending patients home with antibiotics instead of admitting them to the hospital with tuberculosis. Therefore, construction at the state sanatorium slowed quite a bit by the 1960s, and the Judge Hill building would be the last major construction project at the sanatorium. It was built in 1963 as a surgery and intensive care unit at a cost of about $700,000 and was funded by money in the sanatorium's operations fund. Oh, I should say that building is now used as a medical treatment facility for clients at the Human Development Center. This little building is the Guinea Pig Piggery, and it's exactly what you think it was. It was constructed by the PWA during their big building campaign, completed by December 1939. Tests were conducted on guinea pigs to try and find better treatments for tuberculosis. This went on for many years. In the early years, doctors would subject guinea pigs to the sputum of a patient to determine if he or she were still sick. If the guinea pig didn't develop any disease or show any symptoms, then the human was thought to be on the right track as well. This is a portion of the dairy on the north end of campus. I told you the sanatorium had a dairy by the mid-1920s, but they built a new dairy barn, a bull barn, hay barn, and silos during the PWA project between 1938 and 1940. And last time that I drove out to the dairy, it didn't even look this good. So I imagine some of those buildings may not even be standing or may not even have roofs on them anymore. This is what's known today as the chapel. The chapel was originally constructed in 1926 as an office. Beginning in 1940, it housed the patient's 14,000 volume library and the editorial office of the monthly Sanatorium Outlook publication. There's the cover of a Sanatorium Outlook from January 1964. And I believe the building that is featured on the cover is the new Judge Hill building that I showed you a few slides back. This is how that building looks today, the chapel building. It's one of the few remaining buildings on the campus with the stucco veneer. Most of the buildings constructed on the campus between 1920 and 1935 used tile with a stucco veneer or fieldstone construction. It's now used as a chapel for clients at the Human Development Center, and they also hold regular services there as well. This is a postcard of the Hamp Williams building, named after State Senator Hamp Williams of Hot Springs, who was one of the original sanatorium board members, serving from 1909 until his death in 1931. This was a 120-bed dormitory for female ambulatory patients. It was built at the cost of $125,000. This is a current photo of Hamp Williams. It was also part of the PWA building campaign completed in April 1940, and also features that Art Deco, restrained Art Deco style features. It's now used for pre-vocational training for the Human Development Center. This is the Commons building. It actually sits on the site of the first administration building. In fact, I told you earlier that a portion of one of those original buildings from 1910 or so still exists, but it's been completely built around somehow. It's somewhere inside this Commons building. And in 1940, the PWA expanded it even more to look like it does now. The Commons housed kitchen facilities, 4 of the 5 dining rooms on the campus. And by the way, dining rooms were segregated because doctors and staff did not eat with patients and men did not eat with women. It also had a general store, a newsstand, the post office is in here, a barber shop, and an auditorium where movies were shown. And all of that stuff is still inside this building, and it's still used for essentially the same purpose besides the post office. Still used for the same purpose for clients at the Human Development Center today. That's a current close-up of it to show you some of that detail in the cast concrete above the glass block. It's some really, really nice detail. It just needs to be cleaned. This is the Kelly building. And you can see on the right-hand side of the photo, you can see that there's a stucco portion of the building. And that portion dates from the 1920s, the same era as when the chapel building was constructed. And it was built with a donation from Harry Kelly of Fort Smith to serve as an occupational therapy building where patients enjoyed some activities from their beds, including knitting, crocheting, and embroidery to pass the time or to support themselves financially. About 10 years later, the Kelly building became a patient ward, and the brick addition was constructed, that now is the majority of the building, was constructed in 1957. And the Kelly building is now used for pre-vocational training for the clients. These are the Rock Apartments. They were built by the WPA in 1936 to serve as employee housing and also accommodations for families of critically ill patients at the sanatorium. And it now serves as housing for BHDC clients. As I said earlier, the advent of antibiotics rendered the sanatorium treatment virtually obsolete, beginning in some locations in the 1950s and the 1960s. Operations here in Arkansas were significantly scaled back during the 60s. In fact, there was only an average of 374 beds occupied during 1965. However, the Arkansas Sanatorium probably stayed open longer than normal for a combination of different factors, including the high cost of drugs and the state's higher percentage of people at the poverty level. They couldn't afford any other treatment, and they had a tendency to contract tuberculosis because of a lack of education and resources. The sanatorium campus was transferred to the Arkansas Department of Health in February 1973 by an act of the Arkansas legislature. And the sanatorium officially closed its doors on June 30, 1973. And when it closed, it was estimated that 70,000 patients had passed through its doors. The Human Development Center has been there since July of 1973. And that's the view as you're driving south from Booneville out to the sanatorium. You see those 2 water towers. That's the first thing that you see. And I'll be happy to answer any questions, Tim.
Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate it. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to use the chat feature to write down to ask your questions. And Rachel, if you'll stop sharing your screen, I will, let's see, we're going to, and then I'm going to spotlight you too, so we're both there. And we do have a comment, one comment from Michael Dugan, who said in 1918 they quarantined and had no influenza cases, unlike at the stupid people of Booneville. Well, we won't comment on how the intelligence level of the people of Booneville. They were very fine people in Booneville. But yes, that is true. That they did a quarantine, and they had no cases during the influenza outbreak of 1918.
I know, that's amazing.
It is amazing. It shows the power of quarantining for sure.
Yeah, familiar.
We do have a question. Carol Jenkins asked if you have a photo of the fire truck.
Oh, I do somewhere, but not in this presentation and not easily to where I can get it. But yes, I know I do.
Well, if you'll send it to me, I can send it out to people.
Okay.
Email. And I also want to recognize and one of the attendees tonight is Dr. Joe Bates, who actually worked at the sanatorium. I always get that wrong.
Yes.
And he always corrects me. But he was influential I was getting influenza and influential mixed up. But anyway, he was very influential in the treatment of TB patients. And Dr. Bates, I'm going to unmute you, and if you want to make any comments about it.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Rachel for an excellent presentation. It was well done.
Thank you, sir.
Say that tuberculosis was the leading cause of death in Arkansas in the early part of the 20th century, and remained one of the major causes up until the mid-century. The total number of patients housed there at any one moment exceeded 1,000, and there was a waiting list. Approximately a third of or maybe up to a half of the patients who were admitted there died, and the survivors, many of them stayed on as employees. It was a devastation for Arkansas, tuberculosis. We had the highest case rate in the nation. Now our case rate is one of the lowest ones in the nation, and we're talking about eliminating tuberculosis in Arkansas. But our case rate now is about 2 per 100,000.
What years?
Just one more thing.
Sure.
The culture of the sanatorium, it was almost a freestanding, independent community. The people had everything they needed, more or less, including the employees. They had their own newspaper, they had their own place to live, they had their own little social groups. It was a tight, close-knit group.
I was going to ask Dr. Bates, what years were you at working at the sanitarium? Sanatorium. I'm sorry.
Well, I didn't usually say the years. I spent a few months as a senior medical student on an elective there in 1957.
Okay.
I was touched by tuberculosis very much in my own family, and I had a lot of feelings for that place, and still do.
And I will say that there have been some oral histories conducted by with some of the patients that were at the facility, and they're located. I know University of Arkansas Fayetteville Special Collections has some of the oral histories, and there may be some at the museum. I haven't visited the museum on the campus in Booneville.
I don't remember any oral histories being recorded there. They have more material culture from the sanatorium on display, as well as a ton of building photos. And they have some scrapbooks too, with patient photos. I don't remember oral histories, but yes, Special Collections has them at the U of A. And then the Booneville Public Library has, I believe, a full run of the Sanatorium Outlook publications, where that's where you can get a feel of the day-to-day, because it was written by patients.
Mm-hmm.
So they talked a lot about what was going on.
And I'll remark on the Outlook, the newsletter that we at the Historical Research Center, we've gone through most of the issues of the Outlook and have compiled a list of the patients that were listed as entering or leaving the sanatorium.
Sanatorium.
I don't know why I can't get that right in my head. But anyway, we have that list and we'll be posting it on our website soon. And I will also mention it, because I can't go into any details about it, but the records of the facility, I'm just going to say the facility right now. We're in the process working, there's a group of us working on preserving the records of the documenting the history of that facility and the patient records that have been sitting there since on the campus since it closed in 1973. We have a couple of questions. Elizabeth Shores, any thoughts on whether Arkansas's leadership in some aspects of TB residential treatment influenced the state's finally providing residential care for persons with developmental disabilities?
You know, I don't know, Elizabeth. I think maybe it was just from what I know about the Human Development Centers and their history, I think it was more of that was a need. And the Conway, you know, the children's colony was already going by the 70s. But maybe that whenever the Tuberculosis Sanatorium closed and the Alexander, you know, companion facility closed, that it was just that they were uniquely situated in the state to be able to serve patients, and then also had the type of facility that was needed.
Mm-hmm.
I bet it was just out of convenience, and just they were state-owned buildings that had large campuses that needed to be repurposed.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you on that. I think it was probably just more, you know, the building was and they didn't have to build a building, and the infrastructure was already there for creating the Human Development Center over in Booneville. I will say my brother was at the Human Development Center in Booneville in 2017. And the one thing I remember about, he was in the Nyberg building, and I remember walking in there and how dark it was inside. So I don't know if maybe they just didn't have very many lights on that the times I was there, but I just remember how dark it was in that building. And, you know, you walk in, there's a big common room in the building. And then of course there are hallways going off with individual rooms down the hallway. But it was, you know, it was, you know, the patients there, I mean, the people basically became your family there.
Mm-hmm. It is quite dim in that building, and because they only use like a portion of one floor, and then everything else is just how some of the pictures I showed. And I tried to pick I tried to choose some some nicer pictures. There's some areas that don't look as good as that.
Now, if do they have tours of the campus when the museum, I encourage anyone, I haven't been there yet, but I need to go visit the museum on the campus. And do they get tours around the campus, or do you just go in the museum?
I think I would say check with the museum to make sure they're going to be open. They don't have regular hours that I know about. And then over the years, they've asked me to come back and do a guided tour of campus to help them with that. And then we would do all exterior touring. We could go in, I think we did go into that portion of the second floor of Nyberg and just walk through where they have mostly staff offices now, and then come back out the front door. But no matter how many times people ask and want to go upstairs in that big of a group, it usually attracts a big crowd. They won't allow it. But then we end up at the museum, and they usually cook hot dogs and feed everybody. So if it happens again, then keep your eyes peeled. They'll put it on Facebook. I haven't been asked to do it since before COVID.
Well, if it happens, I'll put it on our Facebook page as well, and maybe encourage people to attend. We have one more question before we end tonight. Did many of the employees contract TB, especially early on?
Yes. Yes. And then like Dr. Bates was saying, and I mentioned earlier too, that many of them, I mean, it was a family up there, and if you'd stayed there, worked there, stayed there as a patient, whatever the case may be, a lot of people, even if they recovered and got well, they continued to stay there and work.
I'll just have one more comment before we leave. There's a comment, Carol, saying that she started, let's see. We do have a question. You mentioned that the plans for the buildings are preserved on site without the other records of the facility.
Yes, the plans are there in these vertical files. And then like Tim was alluding to, all of the patient records are still there, but it's in the process of they're all being transferred to the state archives.
Mm-hmm.
Through a partnership of the State Archives, Department of Health and Human Services, and UAMS.
You notice how I just kicked that question over to you, Rachel.
I know, so I thought I'd just keep talking.
We have a comment from Carol about her family. Let's see, let me make sure I can. She started working at Saint Health. Carol, I don't know what Saint Health is, or ST Health, I'm assuming, in January 65, and worked in TB, and no one could double dip at her house. She cultured spit in the lab. So and she had an uncle who died of TB. So I can understand why you wouldn't want people to double dip. But she also says, my family visited one time and my uncle had given Carol a gift basket from their gift shop. And when we got outside, her parents took it from her and put it in the trunk, and she never saw it again. So that was sad. That's a sad story, Carol.
That is sad, and I can't wait until we can get a better idea of the patient, at least the patient names and dates of, like, from the Outlook, like what you said that you'd worked on, Tim. Mm-hmm. Because I had a great grandfather who was there, mm-hmm. but I don't know what years he was there. Mm-hmm. So even knowing that information, he recovered and went home.
Well, as you can imagine, dealing with medical records, it's sort of a tricky situation with HIPAA and everything.
Right.
We're working out all the details about that and what can be released and what can be released, and so it's a complex issue. But we're working on it. One final thing before we leave, I know I said that before. Michael Dugan says in his presentation last month, he had statistics on Arkansas, but a gripping picture from Ozark County, Missouri, of a family decimated by TB. The life expectancy of a mother without an abortion was 2 years, and in the picture, the mother and the father were dead in 2 years. Which, and I have not posted Michael's presentation up on YouTube yet, but it will be there, and it's an interesting presentation as well. And Carol, it's State Health. I don't know why I didn't think of it as being State Health rather than, I don't know why I called it Saint Health. But anyway, thank you, Rachel, for being here tonight and giving such a wonderful presentation. I really appreciate it. I will say that this presentation is being recorded, and it will be uploaded to the Society's YouTube channel probably in the next few weeks. So if you didn't have a chance, or you want to rewatch it, you'll have an opportunity to watch it on YouTube, and you can also share the link. So thank you, Rachel, again for being here. You always give a great presentation.
Thank you for having me.
And y'all stay safe, and we'll see you next month.